Good morning, and thank you for coming to the Policy Committee meeting of September 8th. We are being recorded. Are we being live streamed? Okay. We're being live streamed and recorded for future viewing as well as current viewing. I will hand it over to Megan.
Good morning, everyone. I'm super excited to be here today. First week of school, also first policy meeting of the school year. Always an exciting time. I thought to get us started, it might be helpful, because I could talk about policy for a while, to just share with the committee some of the highlights of work that we did over the summer and leading into the school year with our staff and administrators. So I have a really abbreviated policy overview presentation that I wanted to share with you this morning, just to give you a flavor of how we communicate policy to staff and administrators, because we have so many, like how do we pick and choose what we highlight as we start the year? So we haven't really done it this way before. I've shared some of the information verbally, but I thought this might be a helpful way to share it not just to the board, but to the wider viewing audience with us this morning. So LaToya, if you don't mind, one of the ways that we tried to frame our work is around the wellness policy, or at least the way I like to try to communicate out, where we are, what changes have been made. And I think in terms of it becoming like a sticky message so that people hear it and understand how it connects to their work, it's helpful to highlight that, that aspect of policy. So one example would be, if you don't mind, sharing that purpose statement. So all staff had a chance to look at the purpose statement for wellness and highlighting language where it connects to other work that we're doing. So when you see equity, belonging, safety, agency, empowerment, all of that work that we've been talking about in other spaces as it relates to students and staff, I think is really important, so that it's not just another thing that we did over here and another set of rules that apply. It's really trying to build a comprehensive approach to understanding what sort of the board's expectations are, but also as a community, what are the rules that we follow day to day. So if you can, and then make it a little more specific in terms of some of the ways that we started the school year in framing safety as a priority. Like, how does the wellness connect to safety? How does it connect to restorative practices? And how does it connect to belonging? Because when we can show how those connections make sense, if students feel a sense of belonging, they're more likely to feel less anxiety, less stress, that they understand and have some buy-in in terms of how they connect with the community and their responsibility for keeping it safe. So when you, kind of frame the work that way, it starts, I think, to build that understanding of why we do all of these things, and also how it connects back to that foundation of building belonging for students and for staff. So sort of another layer of that is the work that we did around devices, personal devices for students. And we did that at the policy committee at the end of the year. And we took that work back to the wellness committee and worked with a subcommittee, and also invited other staff and interested parties to be a part of that over the summer. We met a number of times over the summer to try to refine language that we could put in our handbooks and communicate out. And I hope everyone saw that messaging. Amy Buckman and her team did a nice job of doing the branding around that. And we know that there's still work to do, but as I've been saying, like 0.01% better is still improvement. So I like to think that we can continue to build from there with the idea that we're grounding the work in wellness. And why we think it's important to continue to move forward with that is it just being empowering staff, but also giving guardrails to students so they know they can put the device down, and the times and places to do that, and where it's most important, such as in instructional settings. things. So again, building that connection connected to the wellness policy and the work we've been doing in committees and trying to make it make sense for our larger community. So if you could, this again, and just to share, these are slides that we also shared with all staff. So you're getting information that was shared with staff. So knowing how much that they have to take in at the beginning of the year, we try to make it, brief and highlight the updates. And this is just some examples of how that work around personal devices progressed and how we're also not only trying to, build it into our culture, but also the larger community's support around that work is important as well. And we continue to partner with the township and other community groups to help support that messaging as well. And then again, try to build understanding around relative responsibility for device use. And this is something that was developed across the middle schools, and we've embedded it into our middle school handbooks to clarify, sort of relative responsibility and usage. We introduced this at the end of last year, and we continue to want to build this out as a framework. And we're hoping that we're going to, I think, have some opportunities with ISC to present this fall, and this would be another topic or another opportunity for us to share out this work. Next slide. So just a couple more slides. Again, for the purposes of digestibility, this is a way we framed some of the policy review for staff in focusing on, what makes sense for the in service of organizational health. So what are the priorities we need to start the school year with? What do we want to absolutely make sure we're getting right as we open schools? And so you can kind of see by those categories of safety and security, identity and belonging, and identifying within those categories what are those key policies that we're highlighting in service of that idea of how do we make sure we settle in at a really stable place. And we know that over the course of the year, there will be crisis, there will be events that we have to respond to that are unexpected. But if we're doing these things well, and we feel like, and this was, shared with all staff, the safety piece was shared with all staff, so we could start the school year on a strong note. And then finally, as you have in front of you, this is a summary sheet. This is the example of a sheet that we shared with our new teachers, but we also share out with all staff. But again, because there are so many, how do you capture some of the key points? And I try to highlight and group the policies in a way that hopefully make it a little more digestible for staff. And I think as we talk through maybe the work that we can do as a policy committee, are there ways to even streamline that further? So for example, that segment that is on identity and belonging, are there ways that we can think about maybe moving forward of collapsing some of those policies into a place that, under that title, and try to, make the work a little more user-friendly. So I just wanted to share those highlights with you as we start the school year. So we're all hopefully on the same page. Again, there was a deeper dive into some of this work with our staff, but for the purposes of today, I thought I'd spare you all of those details. But I'm happy to do so another time if you'd like that. So that was the introduction. And so back to the main business, unless anyone has any questions about that.
I just have a comment. I just wanted to thank you specifically for the summary of key policies for new employees and for the community to see. I very much appreciate how this synthesis in this format concretely outlines and underscores our commitment to anti-racism, equity, and belonging, and really highlights the values of our district and community. And I feel proud to be a part of a district that is focusing on these areas. Thank you.
Thank you. Yep, I agree. And I think it's helpful because we have so many to really highlight that for staff, because I think that, if you're a new staff member, knowing that these are the expectations and how we, enter our community is really important. So thank you. Any other questions? All right, we'll jump into the agenda for today. And we don't have any pending matters or policies for adoption, though we have a couple of first readings this morning. The first is our student athletics policy and administrative regulation. And the intent of reviewing that this morning is to address the name, image, and likeness changes that have an impact on the PIAA rules and how our student athletes engage in those types of agreements, understandings, contracts, and making sure, our priority is to ensure that we give good guidance to students and to staff so that they don't risk ineligibility. Because we're not really at the moment saying like, this is a good thing, we're coming in neutral to provide the guidance to our staff, though we would encourage our families or student athletes that this may apply to speak with athletic directors in advance of engaging in something formally, so we can try to do some work ahead of time with them. This isn't, to my knowledge right now, a big issue here. It's just something I think it's important to have, so when it does come up, because I'm sure it will and has in pockets, having that guidance. And the other thing I wanted to say about this, we also are going to put this back on the agenda because we know the policy itself needs some work. It's not been updated in a while, and we'd like to, and I've been speaking with Jason Stroop, talked about combining it with our activities policy and making more, again, of an umbrella approach to the work. So I know it's hard to resist right now, but we will bring this back. Happy to answer questions about it, but we know that there's some additional work we need to do on language beyond the new language we're proposing today. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to Ken, Bruce, to speak about the changes.
Nothing here other than what's basically required by PIA regulations. This is a really big net to catch a very, very few fish. It's not going to come up very often, and if it does, there's not really a whole lot of individual discretion on the part of the school district in terms of what it does because of PIA regulations. So, we're happy to answer any specific questions on, what any of these things mean, but I don't want to give the impression that you're doing anything groundbreaking or controversial here. You're just basically in the, I don't want to say unlikely event, but in the event that you do have a high school athlete that does get some sort of, sponsorship deal, you need to have some rules in place, and these are what they are.
We are a school that had Kobe, so I think that just saying. It happened. It happened. And 30 years ago, this would have been very relevant. So I think it's important to have.
Yeah, it's probably even more than that. I am aware of at least one other student who's, signed up for some deal with with some, protein company or whatever, and they are trying to market it. So I think they are probably that he may be doing commercials for them. So it's something and he would be representing himself as I'm a, blank high school player, and I use this and I think it's great, and as a way to maybe put it on TikTok or something to sell to classmates or things like that. So it's good to have in place.
I did think it's very interesting that there can be nothing about what school you're in, what district you're in, that you're in the Central League. It's very tight, which I appreciate. I did have a question on the wording on the second to last paragraph. The second line says, negotiate to pay for a student's use of their NIL unless that student is an individual's own child. that wording just, to me, is a little bit cumbersome, and I'm wondering if that's straight from PIAA and we should leave it?
Which, I'm sorry, policy or reg?
Policy.
Oh, I'm sorry. Do you see it?
Yeah, what's directly from?
Go ahead, Kristen. She primary author here, so I'm going to defer to her.
We can double check, but that's
Sure.
from their wording, because there's a couple of weird spaces like that. Similarly, district alum can't help students get these endorsements as in their role as an alum, but if they own a company that wants to work with the student, that's a different thing. And so they're trying to differentiate between those like little kind of
Got it.
finicky details.
Okay, it's more that that specific wording it took me a couple times to read it to understand what it was trying to say. So I don't know if there's something we can do with the wording.
We can
Of course, I wouldn't
definitely
know what that
reword it.
is.
It doesn't need to be verbatim.
Okay,
We can do that for first reading, in time for first reading, too.
great. Thanks. And then just referencing the concept of redoing the whole thing, does PIAA, what are the constraints or the opportunities around gender inclusiveness within this?
And we've addressed that definitely at a conference level, and together with our transgender, gender diverse policy, talks about how we, address, if I'm answering your question, gender diverse students in terms of opportunities for athletics, so they participate with the sport that they identify with, or the gendered sport that they identify with here in Lower Merion, also across the conference. And I believe that is consistent with PIAA. I hesitate because I've found PIAA rules are not often updated as often as our policies. But I believe that I'm not aware of cases in terms of where any of our teams have had a challenge or relative to how we've implemented our policy and how it's been responded to by our competitors. Does that make sense?
It does, and so
I don't know if you know, I don't know if you know the answer to the PIAA.
Well, no, I was just saying, we need a cross-reference to the policy 259 in here, because 259 covers participation in sports, and it is aligned with whatever the PIA rules happen to be at the time.
Okay, I just didn't know if as we do more work on the policy, we just want to if that should be embedded in, more referenced in here.
For sure.
In a minimum, right now, we can cross-reference.
I had similar questions to Lucy, and I know we're not doing a first reading but just in developing the policy, wondering about the downstream impacts of that we might want to add additional protections in the policy when it would come down to other cases we've seen that other teams forfeit, or it means Lower Merion forfeiting, or things like that. What's the district's stance on what we do? I think there's some ambiguity between 259 PIAA and what's currently written. That was one comment, and then just in the language, just making it gender neutral language throughout the policy. I know you're already working on updating it, but that stood out to me. And I guess my last question, maybe it is naive, but in your example, you said, Chris, about we wouldn't want an alum to help for the likeness. There's some great value in alum who have made it to outside and additional sports teams to being able to support younger athletes, come back to schools, all of those sorts of things. So I just wanted to learn more about the intention or what the risks are of this and what we're protecting against, because I just would like to learn.
Sure. Well, what PIA is protecting against. We're only protecting against being out of compliance with PIA rules. We could try to find out what's motivating them to have this role that they're imposing on us.
I'm just curious. 'cause
Sure, I
Sometimes those
understand.
connections in the same way, like you could get an internship from an alum in New York on Wall Street, and that would be extremely lucrative. This could play out in a similar way, I could see.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that, and PIA doesn't always, their thought process isn't always very transparent.
It seems like we were all on the same, reading it the same, thinking similarly. I'm just wondering too, do we need to, because we're talking about equality across gender, or would the equity policy also need to be referenced to 101? I know that PIA and was it Title IX? Covers a lot of things, but I didn't know if that needs a reference as well. And that's just something for the future to think about. I'm also, what made me think about this too, as we were talking here this morning, what about similar situations for students who are non-athletes, like let's say an influencer or something, and they've got, is there anything that we need to consider this, a broader scope of this type of insertion into another policy elsewhere for the future as well?
You mean like using the district's name or representing yourself as a
Yeah,
district
and
student?
influenced by, because this can happen beyond the scope of of an athlete.
It probably is, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can, we're happy to look into that, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Because otherwise, an athlete could kind of circumvent this policy by simply, saying they're a Lower Merion student dressed in, the garb of whatever sport they're, and leading to the implication that they play for that. Yeah, I could, yeah, that's a good suggestion.
Okay. Thanks. And the last thing was in the language. I noticed on page 6, the second paragraph, third line, it starts referencing HSAs. And I didn't see that defined previously. And I'm assuming is that the Home and School Associations it's referring to? And maybe I just missed it when I read through. But the acronym, I think, needs to be defined. Yeah.
Correct. Agreed.
And that's it for me.
Hi, me again. I was wondering in the added language, because now I'm much more clear that we're putting this in place because of PIAA. I wonder, so the first paragraph of the added language makes it clear, like Article 2 of the PIAA bylaws. I wonder if in the second paragraph where it says no district school, that was not as clear to me, that it was because PIAA has that in place that we're adding that. So maybe there's a way to add like, and per PIAA standards, no district, so it's very clear to everyone that this isn't Lower Merion doing this, we're enforcing their regulations.
And also, so hockey, for example, is a club, not, I don't think that they're PIA, right? So do we, right, so for some students, it's outside of PIA. And do we want it to, I guess it's very related to what Melanie was saying, like something that's also includes club sports and other things. Like, for me, the club sport's a little bit more aligned with the PIAA stuff, but maybe it gets covered by the other piece of it.
I think this goes to what Melanie was
Yeah.
bringing up, that we need something to cover everybody who's not a PIA athlete.
Or do we?
Sorry?
I said, or do we? Like, I actually think that's a greater discussion, because part of the benefit of the PIAA and some of these other sponsorship deals is because the PIAA facilitates some of the recruiting and endorsements and everything else. That's why they have the rule in place. So in a club sport or in an extracurricular, there's not as much organized opportunities for students to be able to take advantage of it.
I think I would suggest that in addition to like what are the legal parameters and putting those constraints on is to find out from our, building teams, like, is this a problem we need to solve? Like, if we do this part, like, what is the scope that we also may want to try to manage? And if there's a good marriage there, like, we need that management and we can do it, we can bring it back for further consideration. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. And by cover, I just meant we need to address it. We need to say either, whatever you want, whatever anybody else wants to do is fine. The thing where I think pretty much the scope of what you can address is just the use of the name of the school district. That's pretty much the only, I think, where you're going to be, the only limitations you're going to be able to put on anybody is, whether or not they can use the school district name. And I'm not sure how you're going to stop it, to be honest with you. So,
Be hard to manage.
Yeah, it's deep, because then in some cases when we might want to be like, hey, look at this student that did it, it could have a counter impact. It's just interesting.
But the default right now is there are no rules for anybody who wants to be a social influencer or for the goalie of the hockey team to do, to use their name for profit.
So I had some thoughts, comments, and edits on the AR that are not related to the NIL. Should we do that another time? Like, if we're going to be redoing it?
Yeah, it would be sort of my preference to do it another
Yep.
time, or if you want to share that as we make those revisions moving forward, then before it comes back to you, in the meantime, I'd be happy to do that. But if there are like questions or general areas you'd like to see us think about differently, certainly I think that's a good conversation to have publicly too.
The big picture, just as you move forward, is a lot of this, the AR is based on quarterly grades, and if we're quarterless, yeah.
We could put checkpoints in there, though, because we do have those checkpoints that we have during the school year. So if we wanted to change quarter to that language, it would match up.
Yeah.
Yep. So we pull
Yeah.
grades because we have to do
Sure.
transcripts at that time, and so we have 3 times during the year. So maybe we do that instead.
That makes
Just a
sense.
thought.
Yep. And then the other piece, sort of related, is, well, it is related because it deals with it, is consistency in adhering to it. Sometimes kids can't participate. I was surprised to read that the AR said that they had to be failing in 2 things, and that is not the experience of the teammates that I know, so.
We have a little work to do.
I'm not suggesting they should be able to be failing 2. But practice is if you're failing 1 class that you can't play, which I happen to personally agree with, but that's not what's written.
Are there any other questions or comments at this time? Are there any questions or comments from the public? No, thank you.
So we will clean up this paragraph, this second to last paragraph so they can go for first reading in this month's meeting.
All right, and next policy for review this morning is formulation and adoption of policies, which is number 4. The changes largely reflect conversations that we've had at the policy committee about revisions that don't require us to go back to a first reading, that are non-substantive things. I think a good example that was used today was the gender-neutral language that we're trying to update as we move forward. So this proposed change is intended to reflect that update, correct, Ken?
Yeah, this is the policy I wished I would have proposed 25 years ago. I've sat through enough conversations where people will look at me and say, is that change we just made going to make us have to go back for a new first reading? And the answer is, well, yeah, kind of. This kills that, it obviates that. This just means, as long as we're not fundamentally changing the policy from the first reading, we can go ahead with the second reading. You have a policy committee in between for people to make input. So this original language is just a PSBA relic from when districts didn't even have policy committees, so.
We need a flow chart. Do this and this.
Not anymore. Yeah. If you pass this.
Are there any questions or comments, or maybe to move that one forward? Like I said, I know we've had discussion about this over time, so it shouldn't be new to anyone. Okay, seeing no questions or no lights, we'll move that forward. The next stop on the agenda is our administrative regulations. We are bringing back the extracurricular and co-curricular activities as well as home education to revise some of the updating we did last year in connection with changes to the law around home education. And I will turn it back over to Ken to highlight those changes.
These are just there was some disagreement in terms of what the state law meant with the home education because of the wording of the statute said you were supposed to allow up to at least 2 hours in order for home education students, which was contradictory. That ambiguity has now been resolved, and so we've had to tweak this just to align with that now consensus opinion.
Any
I'd say
questions?
that makes sense to me. We spent a fair amount of time discussing it previously, so if it's just sort of nomenclature.
Can I make a nitpicky change? It's just an editor thing on page 31. Which page?
31.
31, third paragraph down, home educated, there's an extra space in there.
Oh, right.
Okay, we'll move right along to our discussion items. Not that I want this to be over anytime soon, just the regulation number 7, board meetings, is a discussion item for today relating to, I think, some talks that have been occurring about starting times of meetings and maybe some other agenda items. So I'm going to just turn it over to Ken or Lucy as board president. I'm not sure where
I think, Lucy, this is about whether or not to move the board meeting from 8 o'clock to some earlier time. And this is where the conversation starts.
Yes, so we had various board members had come to me, or it's just come up in conversation about whether or not we want to start our board meetings a little bit earlier. I think it's important to start out the conversation saying, for both board members and community members, there's no time that's perfect, right? So for some people, an 8 o'clock is better because you have time to have dinner. For some people, 7 will be better because we often get home very late, and that sort of eases that pressure at the end of the night. So that's why I suggested that we bring it up for conversation. And along with that, although I think that right now we're talking about the board, we've also had some conversations or concerns or thoughts about, should we be changing our committee meetings? And I think that's something that actually would require, is a much bigger ask, and it's a bigger question we have most of ours at 8:30 in the morning, we have some at 7 p.m. And maybe actually those 7 p.m. committee meetings is we would be aligning our board meetings with our 7 PM committee meetings. I do think for working parents, it can be difficult, but also in sort of the very little research I've done, a lot of, it seems like many school districts do like 5 PM meetings, committee meetings that lead into board meetings, or they'll have several committee meetings in a row, and that just leads to some different issues, right? So then, if you're there by 5, I actually think that that's harder in some ways for some community members to come. So it's just a big issue and something to really think about. I think as we're sort of leading into a change in, a big change in our board, we'll have new board members, that's something that maybe is a conversation to have with them as well.
I also think, given how transparent we are with our meetings, having them live streamed and then housed on the website, there's lots of opportunities. I think one of the things that I would like to talk about with the board as new superintendent at some point is if we want to involve our students more in our board meetings in the evenings, I do think a 7 o'clock start time is more palatable for that. I know that we allow our students to speak before the rest of the community, but thinking about particularly if we want to bring our younger students and our elementary students, even 5th and 6th grade students, I personally would be more comfortable with a 5 o'clock start, or I'm sorry, 7 o'clock start. 5 o'clock would be a little bit too early.
My question is it required that we write the actual time in the policy, or can it be determined like when Denise puts out the dates each year for the board meeting?
You don't even have to have a policy. The only legal requirement is that once a year, you advertise all the dates for the meetings for that year. And then if you want to change it, you have to have a new advertisement.
So I guess my recommendation would be, can we take the time out of the AR, and each year when Denise or whoever is in that position puts out the dates in partnership with the superintendent and the active board, they determine what time the start times would be to give more flexibility into the future.
You can, but it still begs the question of when and where do you have the discussion on changing the start time? of
Yeah, I
meetings?
get it. I just this
Yeah.
discussion would come up every time and have to revisit the actual AR. So if we could give some flexibility there to then have it an action item for the superintendent to lead with the board year to year, depending on who is comprising it, that, in my mind, that gives the most flexibility and responsiveness to the current situations.
You could even say that true for the fact that you say third Monday. You could change that too.
I agree with that, but also I think that there's value in consistency. And so I agree that it, doesn't necessarily have to have a time in here, but I would caution changing it every year or even every 2 years. Maybe that isn't something to worry about, but just something to think about.
And by the way, it is also in the policy, the start time.
Yeah.
It's not just the AR,
But you could,
but you don't need it. And it's not required that it be in the policy.
the hearing the members of the public on bottom of page 5, it says, time may not be yielded or otherwise transferred by one speaker to another for purposes of extending the second speaker's time allotment. That is something I've seen happen numerous times at meetings. And so is that something we need to revisit to consider?
No, we don't allow them to cede their time. We allow them to take if someone has written notes and they don't finish it, they give their written notes and the next person does
To
it.
me, that covers, this actually precludes that from happening because it says be transferred by one speaker to another.
No, they mean the time.
They mean the time.
Some
Oh,
speaker
okay.
can't say, I will speak for 1 minute and I will allow the next speaker to have the 2 minutes I don't use.
Oh, I see what you're saying. It's a time, not
It's a
that,
time,
not
right.
transferring.
That's why-
Okay.
That's
Okay.
why when they say what's not, we just say, just give your notes to the
Okay, I
person
was
behind you.
reading it wrong. Okay, thank you.
I do have a question related to that, but also related to the agenda. Just what caught me is that we do the pledge of the flag and then call to order. And so immediately I'm like, oh, we don't actually do it this way. Do we need to change it? Is it important that we follow it very specifically?
I think I would actually put the agenda in the regulation instead of the policy. That would be my suggestion if we were looking at this.
And we can change the regulation, just use the order of the agendas we're using correctly. Right, Mr. Roos?
Correct. I mean, and even now, it can even be altered by, the president. So I think you just give the superintendent the discretion to move things around on the agenda.
And then lastly, and it's in the AR. Wait, no, it's in the policy. On 47, we do not keep to the 45-minute maximum for audience recognition. We allow it to go longer. Should we at each board meeting then say that, because unless extended by the board for special circumstances? Do we want, I actually don't think I would take that out. I would maybe put in something when we go to audience recognition, say, if this takes more than 45 minutes, it's okay.
You don't need to say, I think you could just take out, and you could just reword it to say, unless extended by the chair of the committee, period. You don't have to have special circumstances. I'm hard pressed to think of a committee meeting where there's been more than 45 minutes of public comment.
No, I was thinking about the regular board meetings.
Well, that's just for committee meetings.
No,
Oh, I'm looking at page
it's right above that.
40, oh, I see it, it's at the top. Oh, I see what you're saying. No, you can simply say unless extended by the board chair but even there, wouldn't be,
It's just that we
Yeah.
often go over 45 minutes and we never say publicly that we're going to go over. We never publicly say we have a 45-minute thing, but we're going over. And I don't know if it's important that we do that.
it's only important if you intend to periodically enforce the 45 minutes. I mean, if you're never going to enforce the 45 minutes anyway, then you don't need to say it. What you want to
But I guess
do
I
is,
don't want to ever say never, right? So maybe we should just have in the wording that whatever the president's saying, we know that if it goes over 45 minutes, we're fine.
Yeah.
For audience recognition. Okay. Yep.
that makes sense.
Can I add one more to the number 2 by news media and other members of the public? That middle statement is kind of outdated. Could you say for non-working, to change video or audio tape, just to ensure equipment is working or something like that?
I agree. And I also think I think that belongs in regulation, just mixing where we are. That belongs in regulation anyway. I don't think this shouldn't be policy, this should be regulation.
Can we loop back? Did we land on that the president would say 45 minutes, or we landed on it doesn't matter?
I think we landed on that I would say, that the board president would say, we're not going to limit to 45 minutes.
Okay, thank you.
But it doesn't require any change to this because it's already there.
We just need to make sure that no one gets confused that we're going over the 3-minute limit per person.
I think we can probably take a fresh look at this and move a whole lot of it to the AR. But if you wanted to give us some direction on what to do about the start time, we could incorporate that into this, or you can just defer that discussion.
Would it be helpful if, we have an information session coming up, if it would be helpful if I can present it then? I know we can't deliberate at that point, and then maybe provide Mr. Roos some direction after that.
Okay. We'll take a fresh look at this.
So probably the most exciting part of the agenda. Transportation. My oldest. So also disclaimer, we, last spring talked a lot about transportation and have over the years as it connects to Healthy Start Time and the changes that will be happening in the 24-25 school year. One of the sort of outcomes of the decision was that we were going to revisit the transportation policy to see if we can realize by any changes there, some additional time that would, in service of, again, minimizing ride time, maximizing instructional time, as well as sleep time. So the inquiry here is really around, like, is there anything we can do here? Doesn't change the start time decision, but allows us to create some efficiencies in the system, perhaps. And because it's the start of the school year and we've been, Aldous and his team have been trying to get, well over 8,500 students safely to and from school. I shouldn't say 8,500 because we do have walkers, but many students to and from school. We haven't had a chance to take a deep dive recently into the conversation, though over time I can absolutely share with you that we've talked a lot about different ways that we could do, things differently, such as like walk zones. What does that look like? What is the impact if you change that? And so I know Aldous has been pulling up his notes that he has taken over time and the research that we've done, although not on current students, gives us some sense of where some movement might make some impact, but we really, until we have some parameters, didn't want to dive into, a lot of different things, and we just don't have the resources at this time. But Mr. Vilsons is here to listen to the discussion, and so we can take, next steps based on the outcome of this discussion. But I did ask Ken to sort of walk us through some of those parameters that are legal parameters for transportation, so we know what those guardrails look like or are, to the extent that our policy is a little more generous than what the law requires. That I thought that was a good starting point to know, like, what can we play with is not the right word, but what adjustments can we make? And then we can go back and say, what does it really maximize for us? And what are the trade-offs perhaps if we do those things? So, Ken?
Well, just from the outset, you're not required to provide transportation, except to charter school students and students with mobility impairments. Otherwise, you could decide you're not going to transport anybody.
What was the first one? Charter school.
Charter schools or students with mobility impairments.
So it's not required of all special education students, it's specific to mobility. I did not realize that.
Just mobility impairments, yes. Well, unless they're attending an approved private school, or for some reason they can't access their special education program without transportation. But you're not required, for example, to transport them, to and from school if you don't transport any other student to and from school unless they have a mobility impairment.
So for those students that have some sort of transportation-related aspect in an IEP, for example, if we didn't provide transportation to anyone, we would not need to provide, that would just sort of fall out of those IEPs?
It's going to be a little case specific, but generally, yes. Unless there's, like I said, unless there's a mobility impairment.
That's interesting. Thank you.
It's academic because you do, well, it's not completely academic because I don't think you provide transportation, for example, to preschool activities. And there was a litigation at one point where somebody said, well, I have an IEP, that means I get transportation to preschool activities. And the ruling was that unless that preschool activity is essential for your IEP, you don't get that transportation. So, as far as, who you provide transportation to, you're allowed to have a walk zone of 1.5 miles. You don't. Yours is smaller. Yours is shorter than that. You could make it up to 1.5 miles, though, if you wanted.
Is that 1.5 miles for elementary and secondary?
Well, you can make them walk to 1.5 miles to a school bus stop. So any student. Now, that also depends as far as what's considered a hazardous route. If there's a hazardous route, that you can't put a child who has to cross a hazardous route in a walk zone. So that means you have to provide transportation to them in a way that addresses the hazardous route. And those hazardous routes are determined by PennDOT, not by the school district. You do have to provide transportation to non-public schools if they're over, as long as they're within 10 miles of a border, any border of the school district. So if a school can lay claim to being 10 miles from the most extreme southeastern point in the district, they get transportation. And it's as the route goes, not as the crow flies. You have to provide, there's some ambiguity as far as when you have to provide that transportation to non-public schools on days the school district is closed. So there's that. That's then there's some rules about how many students you can put on a bus, things like that. As Ms. Schaefer said, your rules are more, or I think Dr. Yanni said, one of them, somebody said, your rules are more generous than the law requires. And I believe, because you're 3/4 of a mile for elementary and a mile for secondary.
Can I ask a question on the PennDOT hazardous routes?
Sure.
So I know parents can ask for a route to be considered hazardous. I know that happened at Harriton, so Ithan is now considered hazardous. Right? Can parents do the opposite? Could parents say, I don't think this is hazardous? Can I ask PennDOT to undo that? I'm not just asking a question, I'm
Well,
not supporting it.
the request gets made by the school district. So if a parent, if a parent wanted a request and to review a hazardous route, let me just find the regulations. The time you get a request from the parent is the parent says, you should be transporting my school. We had this situation and we only had this situation here because the walk zone gave people an entitlement to attend a particular school. So there were times when parents were saying, I live within the walk zone and therefore that gives me an entitlement to attend. Quite honestly, I can't remember if that's still the case. I know this was the case back in, whenever you were open, whenever you had the redistrict, whenever you equalized the high schools. This was the case and people were trying to, that was the one time I've ever seen parents try to expand the walk zone. Generally speaking, it's the other way around. But it's the school district that makes the request.
We review them regularly because I know the township is trying to do some mitigation efforts and somebody made a remark to me one time and I want to know how true this is, that once it gets on a hazardous, it's harder to get it off than get it on. Is that true?
I actually, I don't know the answer to that question. I don't really get involved. I don't get involved in that very often.
I'm trying to protect Aldous. He probably could answer this best, but I know that I think it comes both ways. We will ask for review of routes, but we know that parents also petition directly for that type of thing to happen, and then we get involved in that conversation. I'm not aware, Aldous, I apologize, he's.
If I could just, in a previous district, there were students that were on what was deemed a hazardous route. The township then put a series of walking paths in. They had petitioned PennDOT to look at it again. PennDOT contacted the school district. We supported it, but I don't believe PennDOT ever came out and officially removed the designation as a hazardous route, although there were walking paths now that allowed students to walk. So we didn't prevent the students from walking, but I don't believe PennDOT ever removed that designation.
Good morning. Yeah, the way it works is there is a special form that needs to be submitted to PennDOT. We have to go out, measure the width of the road. We have to count the cars, how many cars go through at a certain period of time. There is other stuff, our safety supervisor does that, then it's submitted to PennDOT. We had situations when the road was deemed non-hazardous by PennDOT, but then parents would petition or talk to the PennDOT engineer, send them accident pictures, and it's been turned around on at least one occasion since I'm here. I think there may be multiple where was deemed not hazardous and then it was made hazardous. So parents have an impact and on the PennDOT. It's just a PennDOT engineer who makes the decision.
And can it be made opposite?
I haven't had a parent asking for opposite, because if you logically think, they can walk if they want to. Nobody forces them to take a bus. But it's usually when they don't want to walk, they petition road hazardous.
I'm just thinking of parents who have been advocating on ways to lessen the impact on transportation, to improve the opportunities for healthy start times, that would be open to some of this. So I just wanted to understand, like, could it happen? And my guess is that it would have to be the family or the student who, right? Like, it couldn't be a parent advocate that isn't directly living on that or have a child on that route.
I'm sure they could, but for that, again, they probably would have to work with district administration and board and request evaluation. So we would submit a form, all the measurements and everything, and submit it to PennDOT, and then PennDOT would make a decision if it is. But again, most of the hazardous routes are hazardous. I mean, Iton route, there is no sidewalks. Traffic is a mess there. So by the Harrington High School. So most of these hazardous roads, PennDOT probably would not overturn, but there could be some other areas where it is.
And are there hazardous routes that the district considers hazardous that PennDOT does not, like, that PennDOT hasn't made that
Yes,
determination?
we make that determination if we feel that student is not safe to walk on certain roads. We try not to, we either do the house stop or usually it would be house stop. So there are some roads that are not qualified by PennDOT as a hazardous routes that district feels are not safe. But we evaluate that every time. And parents sometimes come to us and then we have to go out and investigate and everything.
I wanted to take us in a little bit different of a direction. Anything else on the hazardous routes?
These are both, doesn't require the regulation. It doesn't matter if it's a PennDOT road versus a township road. That just governs all of them, to clarify, correct? Yeah.
And to answer Lucy's question from a few minutes ago, I gave you the mile and a half to the bus stop, but it's 2 miles to the walk zone is 2 miles for secondary, mile and a half for elementary.
I just want to say one last thing, that I personally would not be in favor of a change in policy that would end up in the district saying, we used to say this was hazardous, but now we say it's not hazardous. Like, that to me I would be very cautious about.
Agreed. So I guess where I wanted to take us was really in coming and stemming from the place of in the spring, working and learning from Oldest and so many people around what our policy in Lower Merion is and the implications to start times, and then the sort of constraints on flexibilities we have to explore different solutions to being able to meet the multiple requests and desire of our school community from parents, families, teachers, administrators. So what I would love for us to discuss is providing and adding this language to be more flexible in alignment with what we're actually required to do, and think about how we can then decide on a year-to-year basis, as is written in the AR, for review by the superintendent, for efficiency and safety. So what I mean by that, and some of the examples of this are, right now, and I'm not proposing that we say that high schoolers walk 2 miles or that elementary kids walk 1.5 miles, but by having these constraints, it doesn't allow for efficiencies when there might be certain areas in the township where it would make sense to have that because you're on a hazardous route or you're doing that anyways because we had to follow this. Other examples are having in here, and again, I'm not saying to not offer late transportation, but having it written in the policy that late bus transportation is provided to secondary school students who participate in after-school extracurricular programs precludes us from being creative about late bus transportation. My question is there another way to, like, say, when possible, or, you know, things that it prevented us from doing were stop to stop or other things when we would work through those examples. Additions to these policies that I think could be helpful would be some guidelines around the district asking parents to opt in or opt out of transportation on a yearly basis, similarly to what we do for our private school students. So private school students that engage in transportation from the district are required to fill out a form and then be assigned a route. There's also a process and a communicated lag in time if you're required or think about opting in if you've opted out. So that's where I'm hoping to take the discussion, to just provide the most flexibility for us to be able to meet the needs of the community in our start time solution, and also still provide excellent transportation services.
Yes, and I forgot to mention that we've had a number of discussions about that opt-out option, which is really trying to memorialize what we're already doing. So there's a systematic approach, and we have the data more in advance and able to plan around that. So thank you for bringing that up, because I forgot to highlight that, but that is something that we've been talking about, making a part of an administrative regulation as well. But understanding what you're talking about is, you know, if I could just maybe just repeat what you said, is taking a look at, you know, where's the flexibility, and then maybe moving that language into administrative regulations so that we can maximize that year over year, and, you know, in trying to serve our students well, but there may be places where we can realize a little more efficiency if we do some things a little bit differently, so long as they're, you know, not creating situations that are hazardous and are also within the parameters of the law.
So would it be possible to put in more flexibility in the policy? And then in the AR, we would say we generally, like, I agree that flexibility would be positive, but I also think that we need to provide some sort of understanding. So I would be careful about saying we could go up to 1.5 miles or the 2 miles of the walking without the AR maybe saying, this is generally what our goal is, right? So that if parents like move here, or, you know, they're trying to understand, well, what does the district try to do, right? So, you know, so the policy would be a little bit broader, but in the AR, which is also easier to change, right? That we say, you know, the district goal is to provide transportation, or not goal, maybe it's, you know, current practice is that we provide transportation, you know, 3/4 for elementary and 1 mile for secondary. Just so that knowledge is somewhere where parents would easily find it. And to me, that would be the AR if they knew to look there, but that's a different issue.
Yeah, that resonates with me, Lucy, and I think the biggest, in our whole conversations, the biggest line in this AR that stood out to me that I hadn't realized that we could maybe more proactively use in some of this planning is that this first sentence says, the Lower Merion Board of, I'm just reading in case people can't see it. The Lower Merion Board of School Directors shall annually adopt school bus routes which shall be in effect during the ensuing school year. Bus stops shall be established with due regard for safety and efficiency. And so when we see that word efficiency, I think that actually gives us more flexibility than I personally realized in the spring we had to make changes. And so just wondering what other things would need to be in place to realize that.
I didn't catch that, but the board does not adopt. That's an administrative role, in my opinion. And I think that wording needs to be changed, saying that the Lone Marion School District shall annually adopt school bus routes.
Yeah, whoever it
Yeah.
is. My main point is
Yeah, no,
let's
no,
dig into the
yes.
efficiency.
I'll check that out.
Yeah, we're just checking to
But
make sure that's not
And
required.
even if it is required, it doesn't need to be in a policy. See if I'm hearing what you're looking for. Basically, a policy that says the district wants to, delegates to the superintendent to promulgate regulations that promote efficient and effective transportation for students within the limits of the law. Period. And that's really all and you're allowed to have cameras on school buses. I mean, that's basically all the policy would need to actually say. And then the regulation could be all this stuff that's in the policy, including whether or not the board has to approve bus routes or things like that, whatever the law requires, but whatever. There are some policy issues, though. Your whole, well, they can all be in the AR, is what I'm saying. Is that kind of what I'm hearing you want?
Yeah, I guess my name of the game today is the flexibility, just to be able to provide creativity. We're implementing so many new changes in the district, not only with start times, with full-day kindergarten, with all sorts of things. So as we do that, how does the policy allow us to implement? And my feeling and experience in the spring was that this policy was constraining or creating, whether they were valid guardrails or not, based on what parents, communities, staff are used to and expect. And so how can we mitigate some of that in order to unlock third way solutions to some of these big things we want to see come to fruition?
I think the one place where I differ is only that I feel strongly that our policies should provide the late bus transportation. I feel very strongly from an equity perspective, and how that looks could be different, right? So we right now provide 2 layers at both middle and high school, right? And so how that is provided, I think that there is opportunity for flexibility there. But to me, the fact that we do provide that, I think is so critical and crucial and important that I would like to see that stay in there.
I agree with you in that respect, that for students, but I think we need to look at, is there a different way to do it? I mean, because you hear the stories of 2 kids on a 72-passenger bus. Is there a way we could do like an on-demand kind of situation or something like that? Yeah.
And the broad-based policy can say, to develop regulations, these regulations shall address late buses, dropping off and picking up kids at daycares, without actually constraining the administration to a particular outcome. And you list in there all the things that you want to make sure get addressed.
Now, one thing that I would like to ensure that we have this flexibility is that this Transfinder, am I remembering it correctly? Transfinder has a module that allows parents to have an app, and also bus drivers to have an iPad, which actively updates one another based upon opt-in, opt-out on a daily basis. And also being able to see when a bus is coming, so that you're not standing out at the bus stop for 15 minutes in a cold day. You know that the bus is 5 minutes away. You can get to your bus stop right away. So I would like to see any of our administrative policies and the policies allow for that type of technology in use, even though we're not using it right now. In the future, we may, and I want to ensure that we have that ability.
Is that similar to, we had a bus app, and do we still have we have a new bus app?
In my perspective, the one that's been used in the past is really delayed. So it'll say like, the bus is running behind by 6 minutes, and like 46 minutes later, it shows up.
The TransFinder one looks, I saw it, I'm using it, looks like when the DoorDash is delivering your things and you see the little car coming.
Yes, correct. The current bus app is not GPS-based. It's driver lets us know they're running late. Sometimes they forget to let us know. And we put it on app. It's instantly. It's better than having it eliminated a lot of phone calls from parents. The TransFinder app is a little bit different, but there's going to have to be a lot of policy around it because you have a split custody families. There may be restraining orders involved. Who sees the bus? Right now, we don't manage. All you do, you pick an app and say, I want a bus 5. And you will get it if it's late for high school, middle school, or elementary. I know it's not the best option, but you're going to get a notice for that bus. There, you're going to basically be signing up for a child, and you will see that bus going to stop. So there could be some privacy issues associated with that would need to be looked in. I really want that app. I really want the tablets in the buses too, but tablets in the buses probably is not as policy constrained as the parent app. Because it would take us time to implement it because with a 3-tier system and non-pubs, it's not just that GPS needs to know if it's elementary run hitting that area or it's a midday run or is it so it has to communicate with routing system, which will take some establishment because we can't afford mistakes with that either. So.
I just, again, want to give you a shout out. All this is first week of school, all the busing, it's a lot. You do a great job. So even while we're thinking of the policy and everything else, just want to continue to affirm all your hard work and your team's work.
Like I told Dr. Yanni, you're gonna jinx me. Let's get through the first 2-3 weeks of school. Parents are more patient. The parents are great and they are more patient with our lateness first week. But I already start getting emails. It's the second day of school. Your bus is late. But we started school now. We started kindergarten. Of course, that runs again. Everything that started running well.
You still get an A for the week. You still get an A for the week.
Yes. So yeah, I don't want to celebrate anything too soon. Thank you.
While you're here, on section 5, it talks about bus rates of no more than 2 per seat. I thought in elementary schools, don't we do 3 per seat? Does it expand? Where does it expand?
Yes, we have 2 per seat.
Somewhere it says 3.
Does it say 3? Okay, because I missed that. B. Oh, I see it.
No
Yeah.
more than, yeah. It says no more than 3, but you typically route, so you're maximizing the seats that are available, right? And sometimes there might be a little bit of over subscribed buses, but that's because you know who's taking it and who's not. You're making some informed decisions around that, correct? Is that?
That is correct, and that's actually a good point because that could be some flexibility in that would be great because it allows me more, when we start a year, we can assign more students and we can adjust it later if everyone shows up because not everyone rides, as you mentioned. So high schools, we oversign significantly. Middle schools, little bit. Elementaries, we try not to oversign because that's already 3 per seat. So if we have a little bit flexibility that there could be periods where there could be situations where middle schoolers may be 3 per seat until we find a adjustment to the bus loads, that would be very helpful because we do kind of do that now sometimes. It just the driver shortage leads to us running very full buses.
Would it be helpful at the high school level for the schools to do the senior parking earlier so that you could take those off those routes?
Yes.
Just, I mean, in terms of flexibility and thinking through things, I mean, I could see the difficulty of that would be kids that move in later, or part of the requirement is that you already have your license, so, you know, that would shift to that. You might have to have a little more flexibility there too, but.
Especially if you do opt-in, opt-out, they will not opt out if they don't know parking. If they no parking, they will opt out possibly.
Can I ask an unrelated question, but it did come up around the cameras, there was a comment about the cameras. Do our contracted buses have cameras?
Not, the buses are mostly, contracted buses are mostly for sports trips. We don't contract any yellow buses for home to school. Special needs vehicles, some contractors have, they're willing to install when we request it. Sometimes parents are concerned, so we say, look, let's put a camera on that vehicle. But they don't have on every vehicle. They don't have it on every vehicle, but they're willing to accommodate.
Thank you.
Right, so that, I think that gives us some good direction to move forward. And I sincerely thank Aldous for being here this morning. He always makes every meeting better, in my opinion. So thank you. And I feel good about where this conversation took us, and it definitely gives us some things to work on. And we'll certainly work with Ken and his team to come back with some revised language, because we would like to, in terms of like our planning, do a first read next month into a second read so that we are positioned to make those changes, if any, as we schedule for next year.
And I think I'm hearing a consensus to make it of the policy just basically broad and to give a lot of latitude.
And working backwards, because we did this with the wellness stuff, I think, or one of the other policies. What is the drop dead date? Like, what's the date by which we should have this in place so that transportation can do the work that they need to do?
I've proposed that we have a second reading in November, so that by December it's done, knowing that if it has to be December, because we're, I think.
So we're not
a little bit of
talking
flexibility, but definitely before the new year is what we're aiming for.
Because you also need to make sure non-public schools get a lot of notice, and you might impact charter schools and students with IEPs too.
So we've completed the agenda. We have some future discussion items that I don't think we need to, well, we can plan to have some discussion about future discussion, maybe at our next meeting. But know that those are the things that are on our minds. Some of the things that have been there for a while are in progress for resolution into the spring, if not sooner. And then, we wanted to signal that we know that there's a lot of talk about artificial intelligence. We're not necessarily preparing policy right now on it, but we wanted to sort of signal that it's on our minds. We're doing work in, around it, and that we see at some point in the future, we'll be returning to this committee for some recommendations to move forward, so.
Just going back to the transportation, Megan, I know that Lucy's questions with the timeline, if at all possible to even move it earlier in the segment, that would be welcome.
In terms of the.
Just the first read and final votes for the.
Yeah, I think we could, like, the soonest we could get it done is November.
Okay, got it.
Because we have to do the first and second reading, so, I mean, we could always have an extra policy meeting.
Yeah, well, I would love that.
But I don't think the policy is going to be too controversial, though. The policy is going to be fairly bare bones, so that can get passed. That won't really inform what you're going to actually do, though.
Okay. And is there something that you wanted to bring forward to the committee?
Hi, everyone. My name is Hannah Steinberg. I live in Marion Station. I've been living there for 15 years at this point. I'm here with my brother, David, who lives across the street from me, also in Lower Marion. My husband and his family has been residents of Lower Marion for over 50 years. He and his siblings are all graduates of this school. So I'm here today to maybe switch topics a little bit from what you guys were talking about, hopefully make it a little more interesting, kind of looking at school from a global perspective. I am presenting a case for your consideration and support for SEVIS certification of the school. SEVIS stands for Student Exchange and Visitor Information System. I don't know if any of you are familiar with this at all. There's a few schools locally that are certified, like Shipley and Mercy Academy.
Can you repeat that acronym again?
Yes, SEVIS, Student and Exchange Visitor Information System. It's a government certification that provided to schools. Okay. This certification I'm going to read some stuff and talk some stuff. I just want to make sure I don't miss any important points since it's my first meeting here presenting. This certification offers a lot of opportunities. It has a strong focus on inclusion, diversity, and athletic opportunities, which I think all of them you guys described here. It opens the door for diverse and international students that can apply here, get scholarship potentially, or come here and visit with their relatives and legally study potentially in the school district, bringing economic opportunities, scholastic opportunities, or athletic opportunities. But before I jump into kind of more official benefits of it, I want to tell you a little bit of a story because I know, actually, Megan, you inspired me when you asked me a question about an exchange program. So I'll tell you a small story. Hopefully it won't take a lot of time, and I don't know how much time I have, but I'll try to be really, really brief. So it's a personal story about a little girl who was born in the Soviet Union and very poor and anti-Semitic environment, who worked really hard to get into a specialized English school and learned about opportunities that are offered in other countries that are not offered in Ukraine, where she was living at that time. And her dream was to come to America. There was not that many opportunities to come to America. If you're not a foreigner, it's very, very hard to get in. I know now it's probably easier through the border, but it used to be, there was few ways to come in. There was ways to apply to an exchange program, which is very limited program with local families who might agree to take on an international student. It's very extremely competitive, but also, unfortunately, at least in the region where I lived, it's very corrupt, and only kids of politicians or very rich business people would be able to qualify. I know because I personally applied and was constantly denied, and I knew who actually got into those programs. The other way to get into international and bring more diversity into school and maybe fulfill a dream for kids like me was to apply to schools who are SEVIS certified, because you can apply specifically for visa and you can be legally studying while also having opportunities to later potentially qualify for later education. I wasn't lucky enough to get into school like that because the relatives that I had didn't live in a district who had certification. So I kind of took a long detour. Eventually I came to America anyway, but it just gives you a little bit of insight of what type of people potentially could be applying. But also, as I mentioned, it also opens the door for you guys to offer athletic scholarship, scholastic scholarship, bring an international student from all over the world, and bring that diversity and inclusion for people that you, I know, really care about, right? So enhancing athletic programs, cultivating exchange through athletic scholarship, global competitiveness. You know, this is a global program. It also provides you opportunities to do exchange with other international schools of students, right? And bring this kind of exchange lens and cultural, right? Cultural athletic influences. It gives learning environment, global reputation enhancement, educational collaboration opportunities. There is some paperwork involved in this application, which our family would be willing to cover. As residents of this, we care deeply about making sure there's opportunities that are provided to kids. But obviously, it's not about paperwork, it's more about expanding horizons. We do have a little bit of a personal interest because we have a student who desperately needs this certification while living in this district. Regardless of your visa status, you qualify to study. nobody wants to study here illegally, right? And not being able to later leave the country or being able to continue your education further. So we do have a special interest, but as I mentioned, it's also a personal passion of mine because I've had to go through a much more difficult route than was, and I want to make it simpler for aspired students internationally to come and be in this school district. So with that, thank you for your consideration. I don't know what the process looks like. I'm happy to send you a little more details about kind of why schools pursue this, how much work it is. I know my brother done a lot of research on it and is talked even to lawyers to help go through this. It seems pretty straightforward and maybe, but a lot of times things seem easier on paper than they are. So again, just if you want to add something, please feel free.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you for your attention. My name is David, and myself an immigrant. And I can tell you for sure, getting a visa to this country and pursuing an immigration path is not an easy opportunity like it was 200 years ago. Indeed, the school has an international exchange program, but I would like to ask this committee, or this board, how many international students, like what percentage of international students or diverse students study today in this school? Like, do we really have a good representation of such students? Are local students actually getting exposed to what world looks like? I'm being still an international student in different universities, myself having a prestigious master degree from a very prestigious school. Like I've gotten exposure in my school to all kinds of international students, and it completely changed my perspective of the world. And one of these foundation stones on this house of Dr. Yanai on his computer actually is diversity, right? And having those programs, like having those certifications, will allow to diversity for the school district. Because having J1 visa application, it's almost impossible to achieve. And even if the student is encouraged to go through this international student program, that I think a part of policy 214, right? How many really students have applied to this policy? And then the student is obligated to go back to the home country. They are not actually motivated or encouraged to go to pursue higher education, right? And those are limitations. Besides that, the school does not sponsor J1 visa or doesn't support those students. So it's actually, in reality, having this program and saying, okay, we have this program, but ask yourself, like, do students really apply to this program? Do we have diversity in this community? Or it's a really biased community? The process for applying for service certification is straightforward. I spent some time learning the process. I'm not an attorney, but it looks like, based on the steps that service specifies, there is an online application that requires a couple of hours of a staff member to apply. And there's a government certification. There's an inspector coming to the school within a couple of weeks. Make sure the school is safe, which I'm sure the school is up to highest standard, and there will not be any issues passing this inspection. It will expose the school to a wide variety of other schools. There is 10,000 high school and higher education, university and colleges that are part of these lucrative programs. And it's not just financial benefits, but the diversity the school get. And exposure, like the school will be actually, the students will be able to see the school and going through a process of visa and being, an immigrant. I know that somebody who applies actually for F1 visa, those actually usually wealthy individuals that whenever they come and they think that, we like our, children to start, to get an education maybe, right? First of all, it's a diversity, right? Everybody can apply. But if somebody wants actually to pursue it and move to the school district, this visa program doesn't allow them to work, right? It's usually somebody who is really wealthy, coming to the community, contributing, buying properties here, actually, And school districts, in my opinion, prestige of school district will go up, but also, quality of the residents and the housing pricing will go up in the school district. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. We'll discuss it, I guess. You'll discuss it with Ken and move forward with whatever needs to happen.
Did you want to?
Do you want a few minutes on how this works or no? The federal government has made it purposefully extremely difficult for individuals on an F1 visa to enroll in public schools. The idea the federal government seems to have is if you want to be here on an F1 visa, they're pretty much channeling you to private schools. First of all, you can't take anybody who isn't a high school student. They are the only ones who are even eligible in public schools for F1. Secondly, if you do take them, you have to charge them your full unsubsidized, get this wording exactly correct, you basically have to charge your complete full unsubsidized per capita cost, which in this district is not far off from a private school tuition. Then, the school has to be certified by something called the Student Exchange Visitor Program. So Lower Merion would already have to be registered in that. As a result, you have two applicable policies here, one of which is policy 214, which says you don't accept F1 students. It's just flat out says we don't take them. Then there's another policy 2202 that says you can prepare what's called the I-20 form for a student seeking F1 immigration status, but the only reason you would do that is if you were intending to accept them. That's a prerequisite in order to be allowed to be in attendance at a public or any school in the United States for somebody with an F1 visa. That regulation goes on to say, we don't know that we're going to ever do them. You have another policy that says you won't, but this policy is we don't know that we're ever going to do them. If we do, we'll make a determination on a year-by-year basis, depending on where we have openings, slots, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm not aware, maybe others know, that you've ever taken an F1 student since this regulation or policy was enacted. So that's why this doesn't come up very often. Generally speaking, as I said, the F1 visas that generally go to private schools because they're much more set up to deal with it, and the cost is comparable.
So the second policy, Ken, that you outlined, does that allow us to take F1 students if we got that SEBS certification on a case-by-case situation, even without revisiting the first policy you referenced, or they're kind of in contradiction?
It says the administration will, it's a little bit of a contradiction. First, it says you won't take them, and then this other, and I think if you look at the dates on these, I think the policy that says you can take them, that's from 2017. And the policy 214 that says you won't take F1 students is from 2019. So your more recent policy says you won't take them at all.
But we could.
The earlier policy said, well, you can take them if the administration makes a recommendation to take them, but there's no requirement that we have any. And if we do have them, they have to pay full tuition.
And to take them, you have to have the SEBS.
I'm sorry?
You have to have the SEBS.
SEBP, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And is the requirement to pay the tuition a Lower Merion thing, or that's the requirement of the visa?
That's a requirement of federal law.
Okay.
That's why I say the federal government has made it purposely difficult, or I shouldn't say purposely discouraging public school attendance.
So in this particular case, we could revisit the policy, and for our community members here that are today, they could connect with Dr. Yanni more immediately for their individual case based on the policy we have.
Yes, yes.
Okay. Okay.
So I have a sort of a nuts and bolts question. So this, it's high school only, but if someone applies as a ninth grader, is the expectation that they're here for 4 years? And so they're, you apply yearly?
Can only attend.
You cannot be in public schools
Yeah.
more than for 1 year.
Yeah.
You have to go private school to university.
Yeah, public school is 1 year, yes, correct.
Public school is 1 year,
Yeah.
private school also 1 year? No.
I don't think so. No, that's, no.
And so a student is applying for it, and who manages where they live in the district? Does the student have to find somewhere, like if they're an exchange student, is the student finding a place to live? Is there a program that helps them find a place to live, or does this basically end up mostly family members? So I have family abroad, so my cousin can come because I live here.
I'm only familiar with cases where a student is here because of residency first, based on whether it's a family connection or otherwise. But I don't know, there could be other circumstances that could play out, but that hasn't happened here.
I don't know if it's the same, but I would assume for a J1 visa, which I just went through that process with some folks, you have to provide documentation of where you're living and like an extensive process. So I would assume that's the same.
Right, I was just curious whether it's a program exists where they help a student find that place, or whether the student finds it on their own, or generally it ends up being family members.
Or a sponsor, like if you want to support refugee or someone, you volunteer, somebody has to sign up for that.
I would be interested in just gathering more information, learning more about it.
We can certainly do that, and I'll connect with both of you immediately following this meeting, then I'll follow up with Ms. Schaefer and also Mr. Roos.
Okay, thank you, everyone, and our next meeting is October 6th. I believe that we're moving both first readings forward for first reading, and the administrative regulations don't need our approval. Thank you.